Well, hello there, and welcome to this talk on Joda Beans. I call it Bean Code Generation Beyond. So let's see what Bean Code Generation has to tell us and what beyond might mean. So I'm Stephen Colebourne, sometimes known as Joda Stephen, or for the Dutch people out there, Yoda Stephen. So I was the one responsible for putting java.time into the JDK, more or less. Also other projects like Joda Time, Joda Money, 310 Extra, but obviously Joda Beans, which is what we're here to talk about today. Usual disclaimers at the bottom. I do not work for Oracle. Some people think I do. I do not work for Oracle. And these are my opinions, not my employer's opinions. Cool. So data is ultimately at the heart of what most modern applications are about. Yeah, we take it in, we send it out, we manipulate it, we alter it, we store it. Fundamentally, if you don't get data right in your application, you're going to have a bit of a hard time. So it's really important to think about what it is, how do we store it, what classes, records, whatever we use to store it it's very important. So as a reminder, Java's 30 years old. You probably can't have missed that if you're here at DevOps this year. And in that time, data and beans have become synonymous. So ultimately, if you're talking to an ORM or serialization, mappers, validation, all these various projects, they all rely on this concept of a bean. But we very rarely pause to think, what is a bean and how does it actually all hang together? So let's spend a little bit of time looking at that. So what does the Java Beans spec say? I mean, obviously, that's what we're all using, right? Well, let's see. The user buys and installs the Wombat Builder Java application builder. Well, that sounds great. We've gone out and we've spent some money and we bought ourselves an application builder. And then we've gone out and bought some Java Bean components on a floppy disk. But they include a button component and a database viewer component. So maybe there's something GUI-ish going on here. We're adding beans to the builder and then going off and adding it into a bean collection. I mean, I don't know about you, but I would imagine that almost nobody in this room builds applications that even closely resemble what's described on the screen there, because that is a use case taken straight out of the Java Beans specification. Because the specification is from 1997. And the purpose of the specification is a reusable software component manipulated visually in a builder tool. You can examine it, introspect it, you can alter it, customize it, you can get events from it. And then there are methods and properties which aren't the same thing. So properties are your name and your address and the things that are actually the properties, but you can also have methods, so things that aren't properties are methods. And you can store it, which is serialization. So if you ever heard of DOM or DCOM, these were Windows standards back in the day, and it's all about GUIs. Imagine running a Java component within Microsoft Word or Excel. So that's Java Beans, right? Do you write these Java Beans? The ones that must extend Java AWT component? The ones that cannot use cast or instance of? Must use checked exceptions? I'm sure you all follow all those rules, don't you? You naughty, naughty people. Is that a Java Bean? It is a Java Bean. Because if you write a class named person beaninfo, i.e. the class name followed by beaninfo, you implement the beaninfo interface, and you write a property descriptor that actually specifies that that's the getter name and that's the setter name, you will amazingly find that that is a Java Bean. And in fact, I once heard of a story where a CEO in Sweden insisted on all their code being localized into Swedish. And so the poor developers had to go around and write bean infos for every single getter and setter to make sure get and set were localized into Swedish. So yes, the beans we all know and love are not Java Beans in any way, shape or form. We do have a generally accepted definition for them. They have private fields, they have get, they have set, they have is methods for booleans. You have a public no-args constructor, mutable, serializable. Well, I don't think people are that fussed about serializable anymore. So I think it's important to realize that this is actually a de facto approach. There isn't any specification underlying this, really, at this point. There are specifications perhaps in the EE space that have influenced it, but the Java Beans specification isn't the one. Ultimately, our entire industry stole like this one tiny bit of a specification from 1997 and built up an entire world around it that isn't really justified at this point. The last bit's important though, because each framework has its own implementation of a reader and a writer of Beans. They might be subtly different. So what you get to work in Jackson might not be the same as what you get to work in Hibernate and so on. And that can be challenging. Definitely something to think about. So, I mean, we all know what Immutable Bean actually looks like in terms of what we think it does. It's got some fields. They're not final fields, they're just normal fields. And there's getters and there's setters. Same for other fields. And equals hashCode toString. And that's pretty much what we'd expect. But if you haven't been living under a rock for the last 10 years, you've probably noticed there's been a big move to immutability. So obviously that's much better for us generally, because if you have a mutable bean, it changes over time. So you don't know what it is because it's changing. In fact, the whole point of it being mutable is that it can change. So you can't kind of predict what it's going to be in the future. It's like guessing the future. So immutable objects don't have that concern. You set them up, you know what they are, and that gains other benefits, like they can be thread safe and they can be shared between different threads, get Java memory module guarantees. Yeah, everything's valid on construction. Lots and lots of good benefits. So we should definitely be moving to immutable beans, but that has its own challenges. Can you have an immutable bean? I mean, the answer to this is obviously yes, because there's no such thing as a bean spec, right? So of course you can have an immutable because bean doesn't really mean anything. But beans has traditionally implied mutability. And sometimes tools have struggled, perhaps less so now, but they have on occasion struggled with immutable beans. Perhaps you have setters, and instead of setters, you might have withers. Tools generally don't understand withers. Classes usually have to be final, with final fields, and you've probably got a factory method or a builder. So the difference here from our mutable beans is our classes are going to be final classes with final fields. You're probably going to have a factory method like we've got here, or maybe an all-args constructor, and you might have that with method that allows you to change just one field. It's a simple pattern, but again, it's a pattern. Equals hashCode and toString haven't really changed. So lots of people, when they're dealing with immutable beans, find it's easier to use a builder to go alongside it. Like when you've got a mutable bean, you can just create the bean and go set, 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 and it all kind of makes sense. Your code reads fine. When you're dealing with immutable ones, you probably want to have a builder to actually get those method names to kind of constrain what goes into your bean. But obviously that means it's another class you've got to write and a whole nother bunch of code to write. That gets painful. So along came records. So if you're using a modern version of Java, you've got records. Wonderful. They're this language feature, a transparent immutable data, a nominal tuple is the official name. They expose everything. They're not trying to encapsulate the data. So if you've got a password in there as being one of the fields, well, it's going to be in the toString, right? You've got to be careful that you want to expose the data fully in that way. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. The advantage they have is a short syntax. But there's no builders in there, at least not yet. That might come in the future. The point here really is that records are not beans. These are two different things. They serve different places in the ecosystem. Records are great if you just want to transparently hold some state and move it around and you're not worried about the fact that it's fully exposed to the world. But they do have that different getter syntax, which actually in the previous talk it struggled with, where some of the classes were get something and some of the classes were record-like, and the AI couldn't figure out which one to call. So that change between those two things is going to cause problems. There's no encapsulation, there's no lazy or cached fields, which you just expect to be able to do that, and you can't. So you have got to be strict with yourself in using records. You've got to buy into them. And it is a bit of a cliff edge if you write yourself a record and then find it's not enough, because of the different getter syntax and because of the way the tools work, just moving back might be more tricky. So this talk's really about, is there a sweet spot? does bean generation allow us to provide some kind of sweet spot between the two? So there are lots of different ways to create beans, and how you do it depends on particular use cases. Do you want mutable ones? Do you want immutable ones? But what do we actually want out of some generation tool? Well, we'd like to define it with a short syntax, and we need some kind of flexibility, because otherwise, well, the short syntax is just records. I mean, fairly obviously, right? Needs to be compatible, so we've probably got some old frameworks we want to be compatible with, and we don't want it to have lots of errors. We want it to be a reliable approach. So generally, how usable is it? So would we adopt option 1, which is just manually writing them? Manually writing our getters, well, it's boring, or it's deadly boring if you're writing builders all the time. It's just too much code to be writing manually. It's not going to be tested, it's not going to be reviewed, it might have mistakes in it. So we could IDE generate. Now, to be honest, I'm surprised that IDEs don't do more in this space. You can get IDEs to generate this stuff, but it's a bit painful to do. You usually have to invoke commands more than once to actually get all the things to generate correctly. And there's no regeneration aspect. So you generate it once, and then if you change the field, it doesn't fix itself. It's just out of date. So the third approach, which is what we're talking about here, is code generation tools. So there's 3 groups. The first is tooling based on annotations. The second is tooling based on altering the compiler. And the third is same file code regeneration, which is Joda Beans. So I think it's kind of unique Joda Beans, but I will go through a few other tools just for comparison. So annotation processing is this JSR, and it's this extra step that occurs during compilation. So the compiler calls out to an annotation processor, the processor generates additional files, and then it compiles them. So it's all just part of the build. And it's all magic, it all seems great. So you write an abstract person class, and the annotation processor generates a concrete implementation class. Or you generate a person class, you write a person class, and the annotation processor generates the superclass. Or it might do both. You can actually combine those 2 approaches. Key thing, though, is that it's generating another file, another class, or in fact, more than one class. It's not altering your class you wrote yourself. So when you check out a project with annotation processors, it doesn't compile. Right? When you just bring it down from GitHub, it doesn't compile. Now, you have to be comfortable with that. Now, most people probably are at this stage. When I first did talks around this area 10 years ago, the tooling wasn't that great. Now the tooling's kind of okay, so generally if you've got a Gradle or a Maven and a sensible IDE, you won't have to do too much tweaking to make it compile. But ultimately, the code doesn't compile until the annotation processor had a go at it, and there's nothing that forces the annotation process to have to run. At least they generally generate Java files, which does make debugging easier. So the first tool just to have a quick look at is Record Builder. So Record Builder is there at that particular URL, and it's an annotation process, a nice open source one. So it creates builders for records. I know they were very original in the name. So you add on the annotation at Record Builder to your record, or alternatively, you can also add on implement recordbuilder.with if you want a few extra fancy bells and whistles, and it generates a builder. So it's going to create this class record builder, person builder. It's going to have its mutable name, birth date. It's going to have a static builder method and all the other various builder methods. So you didn't have to do anything, it just generated all that for you. And then you can write the code you kind of expect. So you do person is person builder.builder. A couple of builders there, not in love with the syntax there, but that's just how it works out. Add on your various things. And you can alter them, so you can take an existing person, do with, and then things, or a fancier with, where you actually get a lambda, which is closer to what Java's eventual with syntax might be, but don't think it's really justified at the moment, personally, or just a with method. So lots of options, but ultimately, if you want to use records, and you want to have builders, then Record Builder is kind of just where it's at. So it does what you'd expect. Your code refers to generated builders. Do take care with collections. You need to make sure that they are immutable. Although record builder does the right thing, you still need a constructor. So Immutables, another famous project out there. Again, it's another annotation processor. You add on some annotations. This time you write an interface and you write some getters, and it will generate from that. So effectively you're writing like a specification for a bean rather than the actual bean. So it will generate a public final class, immutable person, which implements kind of your specification and has all the relevant stuff you'd expect to have on it. And you use it in a very similar way. The only thing I'd point out is that immutable person is a class you actively use. That's the main class here. The interface person is something that you're not that interested in. And the last part there, where you go immutable person.builder.from person, is just slightly more convoluted in terms of being able to alter an existing instance, but nothing too bad. There's loads of options. You can do name convention or get name, with name, control the equals and hashCode methods, use nullable, all this kind of stuff. So many ways to generate them. But yes, your callers will actively be using this generated class. It's not something that's being hidden away. Now, funny enough, the Immutables project does actually support mutable beans, except they're not really mutable beans. They're a funny mixture that's sort of a bit like a modifiable builder bean thing. Not really worth worrying about. The L word. So I'm being nice. Okay, so it uses internal APIs and it uses various tricks to achieve its aims. No words starting with H here. So it needs an IDE plugin, it needs a Maven plugin, a Gradle plugin, it needs lots of plugins to actually achieve its goals, because ultimately it's going deep into the internal APIs of JavaC or the Eclipse IDE equivalent to JavaX, and so it's not following any standards. So you need to be comfortable with that. I think a lot of people just will slap on Lombok because it's easy and brilliant and wonderful without fully appreciating that it's not following standards and it could go wrong. Now, let's be honest, the guys in charge of Lombok have done a good job. It's not proven to be a problem for most people, but you need to be aware of the risks. So what you write is you write kind of something very similar to a record, but it generates lots of stuff. So you write @data, and that's your mutable one. You can specify the @ not null, and all the stuff gets generated in the bytecode, not in any kind of source code. So you can't see it, can't see what it's generated. You can use dlomoc to do that if you need to, but generally you can't see it, which means you can't debug it generally. If you want it to be immutable, you're probably going to have to add on @value, @builder. Again, it does what you'd expect it to do. Lots of options. I'm not going to go into all of those in great detail. Again, the advantage here is there's no second class. It is a proper immutable bean. It's just the one class. You've got your IDE plugins, but the generated code is a bit invisible. So now we come to Joda Beans. So I call it a same file regenerator. So what I mean by that is it's generating code in the file you write, and it's regenerating code in the same file. So it's not a one-off like an IDE, it's the ability to constantly regenerate itself. So you write something like that, you add on a bean definition, you implement the bean interface, and you annotate with property definitions. And what you get in your source file is all the code generated. So it's very similar in many ways to an IDE generating it for you, except that it's going to be kept constantly up to date as you change the bit at the top. Now you can still do all the normal things, so you can still, if you want to write your own equals method or your own hashCode method, you can write your own toString method, write your own methods in there, whatever you want. So why does it implement bean? Well, this goes further than some of the other projects, which you may or may not like, they're all trade-offs, in actually adopting properties as a concept. So most other languages have properties as a concept at the language level. It's a higher level than the field. So you basically say where your bean contains a list of or set of properties. And a record is a set of record components. So we're familiar with the concept, and you can list them and you can get over them and work with them as though you're a framework. So for Joda Beans properties, there's a bean, there's a meta bean, which is like a class. You can loop over the meta properties. You can create it via a bean builder. So all the stuff is abstracted. So a framework can access it, not just you as a single piece of line code specifically focused on person. Framework can deal with it at a higher level. So there's some examples on the screen where you can get hold of a meta bean, and you can loop around the meta bean to find all the various properties on the meta bean. You don't have to stress about figuring out whether, well, this get name, because it starts with a get and it has the right signature, matches with a set with the right signature, anything like that. You just know that they exist. The immutable one is very similar. You just implement immutable bean and make sure things are final. That should be public final class, which I got wrong. Again, it just auto-generates into the same thing, but this time it's going to, there's going to be a builder, there's going to be meta, there's going to be other things. Loads of options. You can control whether it's public, whether it's package code, whether it's private. You can add in some validation code, lots of stuff. This is an interesting one which people didn't adopt this, which I thought they would do when I was talking about this 8-10 years ago. The idea that what if you want your getter to be optional? You want the field to be a normal field, but you want the getter to be optional. So Joda Beans can support that. It's not very common. I'm not sure whether many frameworks support it, but it is a great pattern because it tends to eliminate null entirely in your code base. It's quite an effective way of doing it. And there's a lot of hassle if you try and do it by hand because no IDEs will support it. I did say and beyond. So this is a key part of and beyond. I can built in with the library do Joda Beans serialization.pretty.jsonwriter.write person. And I'll get JSON out. Well, that doesn't seem terribly surprising, except that there's no Jackson. So it's all implemented in there, and you can do JSON, you can do XML, or you can do binary. So all three things are in there, and you don't have to put in another library. There's good sides of that, there's bad sides of that. These are choices you have to make, trade-offs. So again, like Lombok, there's no second class, it's just a normal class. The resulting bean is what you would have manually written if you'd gone to an IDE and done it. The generated code it's always there, so when you check out from Git, it's there, it will compile immediately. You've got this extra property abstraction, and there are some plugins. So there's a code folding plugin for IntelliJ, and I've been trying to get AI to generate me a even better plugin for IntelliJ, but it hasn't been playing ball so far. So I'll try and quickly demo this. Where's my pointer gone? Okay, so that is my Joda Bean. And, well, that is my Lombok bean. So in the Lombok bean, we can see all the methods are here in the structure, but there's nothing in the source code that we can debug through. It's kind of the same, except that actually all the methods are here, hidden away in this custom folding region. Nice IntelliJ. And if I expand it out, whoa, there's lots of stuff that was generated. But if you're editing, normally, you don't have to worry about that. So I can come in here, in theory, let's see if this works, and I can write myself another thing, private string friend name. I've obviously got some friends, so only one friend, and it doesn't compile, but hopefully if I press my magic key, which connects up to a Maven build, it should hopefully generate the relevant stuff. I haven't annotated, quite right. I'm glad somebody's here to help me out. So really what I want is a plugin that will just do that automatically. The IntelliJ guys say it's not very hard, but I haven't got AI to generate it for me yet. So hopefully that has now, it's all gone green. And so if we look in the method structure, we should see we've got get friend name, which has been added in. and the equals method and the hashCode method, toString method, so everything's been updated. So we didn't have to do anything, we don't see anything because it's all hidden away in the auto-generated block. But it kind of just worked. If you have lists, immutable lists, so it'll handle guava as immutable list if that happens to be something you do as well. So for time reasons, I shall pop back to my presentation. There we go. So comparisons. So these are some of the things you need to compare on all these different approaches on. Engineering is about trade-offs. There's no one right answer. So there's different approaches being taken here, whether it's annotation processes, internal APIs, or this same source regeneration approach. Do you want to have one class or many classes? So if you have record builder or mutables, you're aware of the extra class that's being produced. With Lombok and Joda Beans, it's just your class. There's lots of unique features that each of these libraries has. If you want something a bit crazy, have a look at record builder's deconstructors. You can actually have deconstructors on a regular Java bean today. It's possible. Some questions you might want to ask yourself. What happens if you refactor the class? Is this class genuinely immutable? How does it handle collections, mutable, immutable collections? Because if you want to have an immutable bean, you need to have immutable collections, otherwise it's not much use, really. Is it complex to install? Does your code need to be valid on checkout? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Good news is you can go and evaluate it yourself. So in order to present this talk, I created a project. So there's a project, Compare Bean Gen, underneath my personal GitHub account. And so there's examples of all the tools we've seen here today, plus a couple more. And yeah, it's just a nice, quick way for you to evaluate some stuff. So in summary, each tool has a sweet spot and a trade-off. You can add builder to records. Well, that's record builder. You want something simple. That's auto-value, which I haven't talked about today, but it's an older project. Immutables, so something really comprehensive, abstract classes, interfaces. So if you want immutable beans, that's kind of been the go-to standard for a while. Lombok, almost a different language. Is it Java? The Oracle team probably would tell you it's not Java. And Joda Beans, it's just generating source code that you would have written yourself. So thank you. I'm Stephen Colebourne, Joda Stephen. If you want to give any feedback, I have 2.5 minutes left, which is probably enough time for one question. So, yep.
Are you able to specify the optional getter name? Because you may prefer some other name that not clashes with your...
So the question is, can you, for optional getters, could you have a different method name? Not at present, but that doesn't seem like an unreasonable thing to want to add. So you could have a getter with the classic name that returns null and an optional getter that doesn't return null. That would be a good addition, I would say. I've got one question up there. We have still got time. Yeah.
Can you combine it with record?
Can you combine it with record is the question. So right now, Joda Beans doesn't combine with records, but I mean, it's taken me too long to write the talk for me to actually do the work to add in Joda Beans to records. So yes, it does integrate with records a little bit at the moment, i.e. you can turn a record into a bean and loop over it in exactly the same way as other beans. What I'd like to do is have Joda Beans generate a builder within the record the same way as you'd expect it to work with all the other approaches. I'm like halfway through doing that, but I got distracted in rewriting the parser. C'est la vie. Yep.
Is there a community behind this, or is it a one-person project?
So this has been used in production. So the question is there a community? This has been used in production for about 10, 12 years at my previous company, but that doesn't mean it has a huge community. It has been used outside that company because it has been open source for that amount of time, and because that company's software was then used by other companies, it has therefore been used elsewhere. It's not a massive community. This is not like Lombok. I'm here to ask you, if you like this, if you think this is a good approach, if you think it's an alternative to Lombok, talk about it, turn up, see if you've got some ideas, and see if we can make it a bigger project. I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop there, so I'm down to 20 seconds, but thank you very much.